It was a crisp fall morning in Manhattan. NYU's iconic Stern School of Business buzzed with a nervous excitement. Students and faculty were huddled in corners, whispering, texting, glancing at the banners that had just gone up overnight. Keynote address, Barron Trump, Reflections, Legacy, and Leadership. Nobody could believe it. The youngest son of the current sitting president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, had agreed to speak at NYU Stern's annual leadership symposium. What made it even more intriguing? Barron had remained mostly out of the public eye for years, even while his father returned to the White House in a stunning second term. While the Trump name was on every major network again, Barron had chosen silence. Until now. The 21-year-old business student had built a quiet, respectable identity for himself at Stern. Professors described him as focused and deeply introspective. His classmates? They knew he didn't like to flaunt his legacy. In fact, many had no idea what he was really like, only that he was carrying the weight of a world-famous surname. But this speech was what set the world on fire. As word got out, news outlets swarmed the campus. MSNBC, Fox, CNN, and even international outlets like BBC and Al Jazeera parked their vans outside NYU. No one knew what Barron would say. Would it be about politics? Would he finally speak about his controversial father? Would he denounce him or defend him? Inside the grand auditorium, the atmosphere was electric. NYU's Dean of Business introduced him with a humble smile. Today, we are honored to hear from a student who has walked through the fire of public scrutiny with grace. A young man many of us know as a classmate, but whom the world knows by a name that divides and defines American history. Barron stepped onto the stage. He was taller than most remembered, well over 6 feet 7 inches, dressed in a simple navy blue suit. His presence alone commanded silence. Not from arrogance, but from the powerful curiosity he evoked. He didn't wear a tie, only a crisp white shirt beneath the suit jacket. He walked to the podium, took a breath, paused, then looked up directly into the cameras, into the crowd, into the world. Before I say anything today, I want to clarify something. His voice, deeper than expected, calm and clear. This isn't a speech about politics. It's not about left or right. It's not about my last name, or even about the White House. This is a speech about being a son. The room froze. You could hear nothing but the hum of the lights overhead. For the first time in my life, he continued, I want to share who my father really is, not the man behind the podium or on the television screen, but the man who raised me when no one was watching. The man who cried when I was born. The man who, despite being one of the most powerful people on the planet, always remembered to be my dad. Gasps filled the room. Not for drama, but because it was so raw, so unfiltered, so unlike anything the public had ever heard from a Trump. You've all heard the headlines, Barron said, beginning to pace slowly. You've heard the scandals, the criticisms, the victories, the rants on Twitter, the courtrooms. You've heard what the world has painted about my father. But how many of you have seen the man who would kneel beside my bed when I had nightmares? The man who read me Bible verses before sleep? The man who taught me how to tie a tie not because I had a press event, but because I had my first high school dance. A tear slid down the cheek of a student in the front row. Barron's voice did not shake. His eyes didn't flicker. He continued like a wave gently rolling over years of silence. My father is not perfect. Neither am I. But in this age of division, maybe what we need is not another debate, but a human moment. That's what I hope to give you today. The speech was just beginning, but already it was trending across every platform. Hashtag Barron Trump speech hit #1 on X, formerly Twitter. News outlets began airing the live stream, millions joining in from across the globe. And as Barron Trump leaned into the microphone with a pause that felt as timeless as history itself, he said, "Let me tell you a story. One you've never heard. It starts with a boy and his father. I was 5 years old when I first realized my dad was different." Barron's voice echoed through the packed NYU Stern auditorium, now filled with a reverent hush. His eyes scanned the sea of students and faculty before him, many leaning forward, hanging on to every word. It was a winter morning in Trump Tower. I remember peeking out of the curtains and seeing people with cameras camped outside. There were men in suits, Secret Service, walking through our halls. I remember thinking, why do they follow my dad around? He chuckled softly, pausing. I used to think he was a superhero. He wore suits like Batman, but instead of a cape, he had confidence. Instead of gadgets, he had words. I thought he could fix anything. The crowd smiled with him. But the truth was, I didn't understand the world yet. And the world didn't understand him either. Barron took a slow breath, stepping away from the podium, now pacing like a seasoned storyteller. He wasn't delivering a speech anymore. He was reliving a memory. My childhood was a mixture of security and scrutiny. I had everything, but I couldn't go anywhere. He looked out at the crowd. You think growing up with your dad as the president is glamorous? Try going to school with 2 SUVs parked outside and people whispering every time you enter the room. He looked down, eyes suddenly heavier. What hurt most was the ridicule. Not of me, of him. He paused. I would sit in class and hear teachers make jokes. Late-night comedians. Social media memes. I would open my phone and see him mocked, belittled, torn apart. And for a while, I believed them. Gasps rang out softly in the crowd. There was a time, he admitted, when I was angry at my father, not because of who he was, but because of how the world made me feel about being his son. Silence. I distanced myself. I stopped calling him. I didn't respond to his texts. I blamed him for things I didn't understand. Barron turned his eyes to the audience. But then something happened that changed everything. He walked back to the podium, his hand gripping the edges now, as if steadying himself for a truth that still burned in his chest. It was the night of his re-election in 2024. I wasn't there. I stayed at my dorm at NYU. I didn't even vote. I was lost, confused, angry. And then my phone rang at 2 a.m. He looked at the audience. It was my mom. Her voice was shaking. He swallowed. She told me my dad had collapsed backstage after the victory speech. The doctors said it was exhaustion. He'd been pushing himself nonstop for months. Rallies, speeches, debates, foreign visits. And all the while he was asking about me. Every single day. The auditorium was still. A few students had their hands over their mouths. When I walked into the hospital room, I expected to see the president. The larger-than-life man with the blazing voice and unstoppable energy. But what I saw was my dad. Pale, tired, hooked to machines. And the moment he saw me, he smiled. Barron paused. His voice cracked just slightly. He said, "There's my champ. I knew you'd come." Tears welled in Barron's eyes. He didn't try to hide them. He let them fall, slowly, silently. That night, I sat beside him. And we talked. 4 hours. Not about politics. Not about his speech. But about life. About regrets. About being a father. About being a son. He told me stories from his childhood. About his own dad. And then he said something I'll never forget. He looked up, now addressing the world watching. He said, "Barron, I know I've made mistakes. But everything I ever did. I did hoping you'd be proud of me one day." There were sniffles across the auditorium now. And I realized, Barron continued, voice stronger, I had spent so long listening to the world's version of my father that I had forgotten to hear his. As Barron stepped back from the mic for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle, the live stream chat exploded with comments. Is this really Barron Trump? I'm literally crying right now. This speech might be historic. I never thought I'd say this, but I respect this kid. That's when I knew, Barron said, lifting his chin, that I had to stop hiding. That maybe my job wasn't to run from the Trump name, but to redefine it. He looked directly into the camera. Not with tweets. Not with controversy. But with truth. Barron stood at the podium again, no longer pacing. His posture was still, yet there was a quiet energy in the way he carried himself. The raw vulnerability had shifted, but the weight of what he was about to say was just as heavy. He paused for a long moment, looking at the audience, letting the silence hang in the air. I used to think legacy was a gift, Barron began, his voice low, steady. I thought legacy was something passed down from father to son like an inheritance. A treasure. But as I got older, I learned the hard truth. He looked around the room, his gaze not focusing on any one person, but sweeping over the sea of students. Legacy is a burden. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barron didn't wait for a reaction. He continued. A burden to live up to. A burden to carry. A burden that can weigh you down until you're suffocating under its weight. The room was so still you could hear the faint shuffle of pages being turned. Everyone was hanging on his every word. When you're born into a family like mine, people think they know everything about you. They think they understand your struggles, your pain. They think you've been handed everything without ever considering the sacrifices or the sleepless nights. He swallowed, clearing his throat before continuing. But what most people don't realize is that your legacy is not just your father's, it's your mother's, your grandfather's, your great-grandfather's. You carry all of it. all the expectations, all the opinions. The world doesn't see you as an individual. They see you as a reflection of a name, a brand. He exhaled deeply. I spent years thinking my name was a curse. I wanted to be known for myself. I wanted to be Barron, not the son of Donald Trump. I wanted to be just like everyone else, walking through life without a spotlight on me. But I couldn't outrun it. The world wouldn't let me. He stepped away from the podium, crossing his arms, his eyes now locking onto the back wall. His voice softened but was filled with conviction. I watched my father fight battles for 4 years and people still didn't care to understand him. I watched him stand tall in the face of relentless criticism. And through it all, he never apologized. Never compromised. He stood firm. And in that I began to understand the true meaning of legacy. Barron's gaze flickered back to the crowd. It's not about living up to expectations. It's about surviving them. And making your own path in the process. A beat of silence passed as the audience felt the weight of Barron's words. For the first time, they could see the man behind the name. When I was younger, I believed my father's legacy was something I had to escape, Barron admitted, a slight smile tugging at his lips. But now I see it differently. It's not a chain that holds me down. It's a compass that helps me navigate the world. The room remained in rapt attention, each student leaning forward, trying to absorb the complexity of Barron's revelation. And so I stand before you today, he said, voice stronger now. Not as a man burdened by my father's name, but as a son who finally understands what it means to carry it. But there's more to my father than politics. More than the headlines. More than the persona that's been crafted around him. Barron took another breath, his voice lowering once again. There's the father, the man who raised me, and that man has shown me more about love, integrity, and strength than I ever thought possible. He looked directly into the eyes of the students. This is the man who, after a long day of fighting with the media or dealing with international crises, would sit down and take the time to help me with my homework. The man who, after years of exhaustion, would get up every morning to check in on me, make sure I had everything I needed to succeed. That man, he's my father. Barron's voice quivered slightly as he continued. I've come to realize something important, and it took me a long time to get there. Legacy is not just about fame. It's about character. It's about how you make people feel, how you impact their lives. And my dad, he may not always get it right in the public eye. But when it came to me, he was everything I could ever need. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Barron was no longer just the son of Donald Trump. He was an individual, a man sharing a deep, personal truth about his family, his father. I don't need to make speeches for anyone's approval. I don't need to stand before a room of people and explain why my father did what he did. All I need to do is live a life that makes him proud, because that's what matters. And that's how I'll carry this legacy forward. He let those words sit in the air, their weight settling over the audience. The live stream was now swarming with comments. The hashtag Barron Trump Speaks was trending higher than any political event in recent memory. As Barron finished, the applause that followed was not the polite, obligatory kind. It was raw, real, and heartfelt. The audience had witnessed something extraordinary. A young man shedding the weight of an impossible legacy and finding his own voice in the process. I'll be honest with you, he continued, his voice growing more sincere. The road ahead is still uncertain. There are going to be days when I feel like I'm walking in my father's shadow. But there are also days when I feel like I'm walking alongside him. And that's where I've learned to embrace the future. The audience was captivated now, not just by his words but by the transformation they were witnessing. Barron Trump was no longer a symbol of political conflict or a family name that carried burdens. He was a young man, like any other, trying to carve out his own place in the world. I may be the son of Donald Trump, but I am also Barron, an individual with hopes, dreams, and the desire to make the world a better place in my own way. He stopped for a moment, glancing down at his notes, but the words were no longer necessary. The truth was already clear to everyone in the room. What I've learned in the past few years is that legacy doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a foundation. It can be something that pushes you to do better, be better, and strive for greatness. Barron's eyes met the camera as he spoke those words, directed not only to the audience in front of him but to the millions watching through the live stream. He had been afraid of his father's legacy for so long, and now, for the first time, he was embracing it, not as a weight, but as a guide. I know I will never escape the shadow of my father's name, he added, a wry smile forming. But I'm okay with that now. Because it's not the shadow I need to escape, it's the expectation. The idea that I have to be something I'm not. He paused, letting the finality of those words sink in. He had said what he needed to say. He had released himself from the invisible chains that had bound him for so long. The young man who had entered the room was no longer the same. So to everyone who thinks they know me, who thinks they understand my struggles, understand this. I am more than my father's legacy. I am my own man. And I will define my future. The applause that erupted from the crowd was thunderous. It wasn't the applause of political supporters or media followers. It was the applause of a room full of people who had witnessed a young man's evolution from boyhood to adulthood. It was the applause of people who recognized the strength it took to stand up and speak your truth, no matter how difficult it may be. The live stream chat exploded with praise. Wow, Barron just became the person he was meant to be. Incredible speech. He's not just Trump's son. He's Barron. I have so much respect for this guy now. He's wise beyond his years. This kid just blew my mind. He's going places. Barron stood there for a moment, the weight of his speech still settling in. For the first time, he felt free. Free from the expectations of others. Free to live his life on his own terms. He stepped down from the podium, his heart pounding in his chest, but his spirit lighter than it had ever been before.